Rick Harrison may be the face of the wildly successful reality show Pawn Stars, but the version you see on screen is only a fraction of who he really is. Behind the cameras and vintage collectibles lies a man with a life full of twists, scandals, and decisions that never made it to TV. From shady legal battles to explosive family drama, Rick's personal life has been anything but boring. Fans who think they know Rick may want to brace themselves, because what's been hidden off camera is far more dramatic than anything shown at the gold and silver pawn shop. In the early days of Pawn Stars, Rick was celebrated as the sharp-minded, no-nonsense businessman who ran a tight ship. But even before the cameras ever rolled, Rick had already lived several lifetimes worth of ups and downs. Most fans don't realize Rick dropped out of high school and struggled with epilepsy throughout his teenage years. Those struggles pushed him to find unconventional paths toward success, and some of those paths might not have been entirely clean. That hustler mentality shaped his business tactics and personal choices alike. One of the biggest misconceptions about Rick is that he's always been a straight shooter. But insiders from the Las Vegas pawn community have quietly whispered about how the gold and silver pawn shop didn't always operate by the book. In the early 2000s, local competitors accused the shop of shady under-the-table deals and favoring certain sellers while lowballing desperate customers. These claims were never proven in court, but the rumors never fully disappeared either. Still, Rick had a knack for staying clean publicly. He cultivated an image of a wise, even-keeled negotiator with a love for history and rare items. But in reality, Rick was managing growing tension behind the scenes, especially with his own family. His relationship with his father, Richard the Old Man Harrison, wasn't as smooth as the show portrayed. Sources say the two frequently clashed over the direction of the business, with Rick pushing for expansion and TV fame, while his father wanted to stick to traditional pawn dealing. Their disagreements reportedly reached a breaking point after Pawn Stars exploded in popularity. While the cameras showed the father-son duo playfully arguing over rare coins and antique weapons, off-screen, the conversations were said to be much more heated and personal. Money and fame only made things more complicated, and Rick's hunger to become the face of the operation began to create a rift with his father, and eventually with the rest of his family too. But that was just the beginning. Because what Rick did next not only shook his family to the core, but also kicked off a chain of legal battles and betrayals that would follow him for years. After years of tension simmering beneath the surface, everything came crashing down following the death of Rick's father, Richard the Old Man Harrison, in 2018. Fans of Pawn Stars mourned the loss of the gruff, old-school patriarch, and Rick gave the public every impression that the family was grieving together. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling fast, and it all centered on a bombshell detail hidden in the old man's will. When the will was made public, sharp-eyed fans noticed something odd. Rick's brother, Christopher, had been completely cut out. Not just overlooked, but specifically disinherited. "I would like to express my love and affection for Christopher Keith Harrison," the will stated coldly. "However, for purposes of this will, I have intentionally and with full knowledge failed to provide for him." That line sparked speculation everywhere. But the real story was worse than anyone imagined. Christopher, who had long been kept out of the Pawn Stars spotlight, reportedly had a complicated relationship with both Rick and their father. While Rick became the public face of the family business, Christopher struggled to find footing. Tensions over money, business shares, and personal respect had festered for years. And some insiders believe Rick was the one who influenced the old man to exclude Christopher entirely. Whether or not that's true, the fallout was immediate and ugly. Christopher didn't stay quiet. Rumors swirl that he was considering legal action to contest the will, and family insiders say that even other relatives were shocked by how coldly the situation was handled. Rick, meanwhile, kept a calm face for the cameras but was reportedly scrambling behind the scenes to contain the drama and protect the Pawn Stars brand. The legal documents didn't lie, and public opinion started to shift. Fans began asking difficult questions. Why would a father specifically name a son just to cut him out? What really happened between the brothers? And was Rick behind the decision, or simply the beneficiary of someone else's final grudge? As the dust settled, it became clear that Rick wasn't just running a pawn shop, he was navigating a full-blown family feud with real consequences. And this wasn't the last time a family member would challenge him. The scandal rocked Rick's carefully managed image, and though it didn't stop the show's momentum, it definitely left a crack in the facade. The situation made one thing painfully clear. Rick wasn't the level-headed, unshakable family man fans thought they knew. He was a savvy operator who knew how to protect his empire, even if it meant sacrificing family along the way. But Rick's family drama didn't end with his father's death. In fact, what came next would pit Rick against his own mother, and this time the courtroom would become the battleground. Just when fans thought the drama within the Harrison family had peaked, things took an even darker turn. In early 2022, Rick Harrison's name made headlines again, but this time it was for being sued by his own mother. The lawsuit stunned fans of Pawn Stars, who had grown used to seeing Rick as the composed and clever businessman. But behind closed doors, his own family accused him of betrayal and manipulation. The lawsuit was filed by Joanne Rue Harrison, the widow of the old man. In the complaint, Joanne alleged that Rick had convinced her to sign over her share of the family's assets, including the famous gold and silver pawn shop, while she was still grieving her husband's death. According to her, she had no idea what she was signing at the time and trusted Rick to handle everything honorably. Instead, she claimed he took control of bank accounts, real estate, and millions of dollars, effectively cutting her out of her late husband's estate. The lawsuit painted a picture of a cold, calculated power grab. Joanne stated that she wasn't even given a proper accounting of what she was owed and that Rick had been dodging her attempts to get answers. Suddenly, the wholesome image of a close-knit, family-run pawn shop was replaced by something much more unsettling: a mother publicly accusing her son of deceit and financial abuse. Rick responded through his lawyer, calling the allegations false and absurd. He said he was heartbroken by the lawsuit and insisted that the legal dispute was driven by a misunderstanding about the handling of family assets. But fans weren't so sure. The very idea that the star of Pawn Stars could be accused of swindling his own mother sent shockwaves through the internet. Was it a simple miscommunication, or was there more to the story? As the lawsuit gained attention, more uncomfortable details came out. Joanne's attorneys claimed that Rick had taken over a trust that was meant to provide her with income and that she had no access to it. She also alleged that she'd been largely shut out of the family business. In short, she felt manipulated, ignored, and cheated by her own son. This wasn't just a messy family disagreement. It was a deeply personal betrayal aired in public, and it raised serious questions about how Rick handled his role as both a businessman and a son. Was he protecting the family's legacy or controlling it for his own benefit? The case is still ongoing, but no matter how it ends, it's clear that Rick's off-camera life is far more dramatic than anything we've seen on Pawn Stars. And if fans were hoping that was the worst of it, they were in for an even bigger surprise. Because next up, Rick's name gets linked to political money, campaign scandals, and a deal that raised more than just a few eyebrows. While Rick Harrison's family life was already generating a significant amount of drama, the plot thickened even further when he found himself tied to a controversial political donation scandal. For years, fans knew Rick as the sharp-witted businessman running the family-owned gold and silver pawn shop. But they didn't know about his involvement in the world of political campaigns and how his financial contributions would soon stir up a whirlwind of controversy. In 2021, it was revealed that Rick had donated significant amounts of money to several high-profile political candidates, and his contributions weren't just small change. Rick had given hundreds of thousands of dollars to conservative PACs and super PACs, the groups responsible for funding political campaigns and promoting specific agendas. The revelation sent shockwaves through both the political and entertainment worlds. The question on everyone's mind: why was a reality TV star so deeply involved in political fundraising? What made this situation even more eyebrow-raising was the nature of some of the candidates and causes Rick had supported. His donations were tied to individuals and organizations with controversial stances that some of his fans, particularly those who considered themselves politically moderate, found alarming. While Rick's political leanings were no secret, the scale and timing of these donations raised questions about whether he was using his fame and platform to push a personal agenda, or simply trying to influence public opinion in ways that weren't entirely transparent. What added fuel to the fire was the fact that some of the politicians Rick had financially backed were under investigation for corruption, financial mismanagement, or even human rights violations. The timing of these donations created an uncomfortable association, leaving many wondering if Rick was trying to align himself with controversial figures to gain access to power and wealth. As the story continued to unfold, a few key details came to light. Rick had funneled his donations through a number of shell organizations, making it difficult for the public to trace where his money was going and who was benefiting. This sort of financial maneuvering raised red flags, as it hinted at potential conflicts of interest and a deliberate effort to avoid scrutiny. Critics began to question Rick's role in the larger political landscape. suggesting that he might be using his pawnshop empire as a front to funnel money into political causes that aligned with his business interests. The entire situation felt murky, and fans of Pawn Stars were left divided. Some supported Rick's right to donate to the causes of his choosing, while others felt uncomfortable with the ethical implications of his actions. But as the story escalated, more revelations came to light that would only deepen the mystery surrounding Rick's political involvement. What was Rick's true motivation? Was he really just exercising his freedom to support the candidates he believed in, or was there something darker behind these massive donations? And with his public image on the line, Rick would have to navigate through even more controversies in the years to come. Stay tuned, because the scandalous connections Rick had made behind closed doors would soon come to light, and trust us, they're even more jaw-dropping than you can imagine. While most fans tune into Pawn Stars to watch Rick Harrison haggle over rare antiques and historical treasures, what they didn't know was that behind the scenes, the show's production was rife with drama, specifically when it came to pay disputes. Rick, despite being the face of the show, was not always on the best terms with the crew members and cast. And in 2019, the tension between Rick and his co-stars reached a boiling point that threatened to shut down production entirely. It all started when Chum Lee, one of the show's fan-favorite characters, publicly accused Rick of being unfair when it came to the distribution of profits from the show. Chum Lee claimed that despite his growing popularity and comedic role on the series, he was being underpaid compared to his fellow cast members, specifically Rick. Rumors began swirling that the rift between them wasn't just a personal feud but had serious financial implications for everyone involved in the show. In the world of television, salary disputes are not uncommon, but what made this situation particularly interesting was the fact that Chum Lee was no small player in the show's success. He had become a beloved figure over the years, and his antics with Rick made for some of the show's most iconic moments. Yet, despite this, it appeared that Chum Lee and the other cast members were not seeing their fair share of the pie. It wasn't long before other cast members like Corey Harrison, Rick's own son, joined the conversation, claiming they too were feeling the financial pinch. As the show continued to grow in popularity, the paychecks being handed out seemed to dwindle, while Rick's own salary ballooned. The narrative quickly shifted from a simple pay dispute to a much larger conversation about power dynamics and the distribution of wealth among the cast and crew of Pawn Stars. Rick, for his part, denied any wrongdoing, stating that the financial negotiations were all part of the business side of things. He argued that he had been in the pawn industry long before the cameras ever rolled, and he had made it clear from the start that the show was a business first and foremost. Yet, many fans began to see this situation as an example of the exploitation that often happens behind the scenes in the world of reality television. The cast, despite their roles as central characters, were still essentially working for the brand that Rick had built over the years. As the tension mounted, a stunning new development came to light. A leaked email from Rick to the production team suggested that Rick had been in talks to create a new spin-off show, one that would potentially exclude Chum Lee and the rest of the original cast. The email revealed that Rick had been planning to transition to a solo venture, cutting ties with some of the people who helped make Pawn Stars the phenomenon it was. The backlash was swift and fierce. Fans of the show were horrified by the idea of Rick going solo and abandoning the core cast members who had helped elevate the series to its iconic status. The news of this potential spin-off sent shockwaves throughout the media, as the already volatile situation between Rick and his castmates seemed to spiral out of control. The possibility of a Rick Harrison-less Pawn Stars was an unimaginable concept for fans who had grown attached to the chemistry between Rick, Chum Lee, and Corey. This ongoing feud reached its apex when Chum Lee went public with an interview that exposed the internal struggles of the show's production and hinted at a deep fracture between the cast and Rick himself. As this drama unfolded in the media, fans were left wondering, would the Harrison family reconcile, or was this the end of Pawn Stars as we knew it? What was Rick's true intention behind all of this? Was he trying to secure his own financial future at the expense of the people closest to him, or was he simply playing the game to secure more power in the ever-changing world of reality TV? The legal battles that followed Rick Harrison's disputes with the Pawn Stars cast added a whole new layer of controversy to an already explosive situation. While the drama between Rick and his co-stars was playing out in public, things began to heat up behind closed doors as well. The accusations, financial disputes, and betrayal hinted at in the leaked email led to multiple lawsuits that threatened to dismantle the Pawn Stars brand entirely. It all began when Chum Lee filed a lawsuit against Rick, claiming breach of contract and unpaid earnings. The lawsuit alleged that he had been denied fair compensation for his role in the show and that Rick's actions, Particularly the rumored spin-off plans had damaged his reputation and economic standing. Chumlee's legal team argued that the publicity stunt that Rick had been orchestrating in secret was a direct violation of their contractual agreements and was detrimental to Chumlee's own career, which had been built on the show's success. The public fallout from this lawsuit was dramatic. Media outlets quickly picked up the story, adding fuel to the fire of Pawn Stars' internal tensions. Fans were divided. Some rallied behind Chumlee, accusing Rick of exploiting the people who had helped make the show a hit, while others sided with Rick, claiming that he had every right to control the direction of his own business. The scandal reached a fever pitch, with widespread discussions on social media, forums, and news outlets. The idea that a seemingly stable reality show could be so volatile left audiences shocked and on edge, wondering if Pawn Stars was on the verge of collapse. While Chumlee's lawsuit made headlines, Corey Harrison also threw his hat into the legal ring. Corey, too, felt slighted by Rick, believing that he wasn't being compensated fairly for his role as the show's second most visible star. Corey's lawsuit, while not as publicized as Chumlee's, added fuel to the ongoing fire. Corey accused Rick of keeping him in the dark about contract renegotiations and not giving him a stake in the ever-growing profits of the show. The father-son duo was now officially at odds, with Corey publicly stating that Rick had become more of a businessman than a father, and that their relationship had deteriorated because of it. What made this situation even more complex was the fact that Pawn Stars had become a cultural phenomenon by this point, with millions of fans around the world following the lives of the Harrison family. The possibility that the show could be tainted by these internal struggles was unsettling for many fans. The longer the legal battles raged on, the more it seemed like the show's days were numbered. Rick, always the businessman, quickly hired a team of high-powered lawyers to defend himself in lawsuits. His legal team came out swinging, claiming that the cast members had simply misunderstood their roles in the show's production and that there was no wrongdoing on Rick's part. According to Rick, the financial decisions were simply a result of standard industry practices, and that the lawsuit was merely an attempt by his co-stars to take advantage of his success. Yet, despite his defense, the legal drama took a toll on Rick's public image. The once beloved star of Pawn Stars now found himself under intense scrutiny. As the lawsuits dragged on, his relationship with his co-stars appeared irreparable. Even with his legal victories, Rick's reputation had been permanently damaged, and the damage to Pawn Stars was beginning to show. At the height of the legal battles, the show's ratings took a significant dip. Fans, disillusioned by the growing tension behind the scenes, started to tune out, with some even expressing a desire to see the show end. This was a far cry from the once unstoppable juggernaut that had dominated television ratings for years. Just when it seemed like Rick Harrison's empire was on the verge of collapse, something unexpected happened. The show's ratings began to see a slight uptick, fueled by a new wave of interest. Viewers who had long abandoned Pawn Stars were now curious to see what was happening behind the scenes. The media frenzy surrounding Rick's legal troubles and his family disputes seemed to have reached a boiling point. But it was this very chaos that ultimately became a turning point for Rick and the show. Rick Harrison, ever the businessman, quickly adapted to the changing tide. He realized that to stay relevant, he needed to redefine not just the direction of Pawn Stars, but also his own image. No longer content with just being a pawn shop owner on TV, Rick embraced the controversy surrounding his personal life, using it to his advantage. In interviews and public appearances, he started to lean into the persona of a survivor, someone who had weathered the storm of legal battles and public scrutiny. But the key to this revitalization came in the form of an unexpected partnership. Rick reached out to former stars of reality TV and even celebrities from outside the industry to bring fresh energy to Pawn Stars. Instead of focusing on family drama and pawn transactions, the show began featuring guest appearances from well-known figures. This celebrity crossover helped the show stay in the public eye, adding a layer of excitement and unpredictability that fans had longed for. At the same time, Rick restructured his relationships with the staff at the pawn shop. The once tense environment between him and Corey began to show signs of healing. By shifting the focus back to the core of what made Pawn Stars great, the interactions between the staff, their quirky personalities, and the crazy items coming through the shop, Rick started to bring back the nostalgia that fans had originally loved. Rick also made it clear that he was still committed to the business side of the pawn shop, but with a new sense of authenticity. The deals on the show became less about quick profit and more about the stories behind the items being sold. Whether it was a rare artifact, an old collector's piece, or a family heirloom, Rick began to focus on the history and value of the items, allowing for deeper storytelling and more emotional moments. However, not all was perfect. While Rick's new approach helped bring in a temporary resurgence in ratings, the shadows of past controversies were never fully erased. The damage to his image was done, and despite the revival of the show's popularity, there were still fans who viewed Rick as a business mogul more than a father or friend. His redemption story would never be fully accepted by all, but it was undeniable that Rick had managed to reinvent himself in a way that kept Pawn Stars from fading into obscurity. Yet, in the back of his mind, Rick knew that this new lease on life for the show was fragile. The industry was shifting, and the audience's appetite for reality TV was constantly changing. He had to keep evolving, or risk losing it all. As the dust began to settle, Rick Harrison's public persona had undergone a dramatic transformation. The man who once seemed untouchable in the world of reality TV was now fighting to keep his legacy intact. Despite his best efforts, the constant media scrutiny left its mark. But in the aftermath of his legal troubles, a more introspective Rick emerged, someone who had learned from his mistakes and was looking to redefine his future. His life was no longer just about pawning items and making deals. It was about finding redemption. Behind the scenes, Rick continued to navigate the delicate balance between family and business. The public's perception of his relationship with his son Corey was still shaky at best. Although the two had come a long way since their public feuds, their relationship remained somewhat strained. Despite the healing moments seen on the show, there were still private battles playing out that weren't televised. Yet Rick understood that family dynamics would always play a crucial role in his personal and professional life. In interviews, he began to speak more openly about the importance of family, acknowledging his mistakes as a father and vowing to be better for his kids. On the business front, Rick found himself constantly rethinking the direction of Pawn Stars. The show, once a staple of the History Channel, was now facing fierce competition from newer reality TV series and online streaming platforms. While his revitalization efforts had brought back some old viewers, the question remained, could Pawn Stars survive in the long term? Rick's passion for the pawn shop was still there, but his focus had shifted. He wasn't just trying to keep the ratings up anymore. He was trying to protect what he had built, ensuring that the legacy of the shop would outlast the show. Interestingly, Rick's personal experiences had also led him to a newfound appreciation for authenticity. In an era where reality TV often felt staged or scripted, Rick was determined to keep his show as genuine as possible. He started emphasizing the real-life stories behind the items being sold, focusing on the human connection and history tied to each item. This shift in direction not only appealed to the audience, but also resonated with Rick on a deeper level. However, even with all the introspection and changes, Rick was acutely aware of his reputation in the industry. His past mistakes would never fully be forgotten, and the controversies surrounding him would likely remain part of the narrative. The damage to his image had been done, and no amount of positive press or public statements could erase that. But what Rick did have was a chance to redefine what it meant to be a reality TV star in the 21st century. He didn't have to be a villain or a hero. He could just be Rick Harrison, a man who had learned, adapted, and grown. As the years went on, Rick became more involved in philanthropic efforts, contributing to charities and helping local communities. It was a quieter, more reflective Rick that the public began to see, and it was clear that the lessons learned from his past would shape the rest of his career. But would this new version of Rick Harrison be enough to keep him relevant in the competitive world of television? Only time would tell. Just when it seemed like Rick Harrison's career was heading toward a quiet retirement, the unexpected happened. The pawn shop mogul made a comeback that no one saw coming. The world had moved on from the scandals, the courtroom battles, and the strained father-son dynamics that had once made Pawn Stars the talk of the town. But Rick wasn't done yet. He had more to offer, and he was about to prove it in a way no one anticipated. In a move that shocked both his fans and critics, Rick announced a revitalization of the Pawn Stars brand. This time, however, it wasn't just about the classic pawn shop antics. He wanted to take the show in an entirely new direction, focusing not only on high-value items and intense negotiations, but also bringing in a fresh perspective on history, culture, and artifacts from around the world. The goal? To merge the charm of his old business with a broader, more modern appeal. The show was rebranded, drawing in a wider audience and injecting new life into the long-running series. As part of this revival, Rick also leveraged his years of experience and hard-won lessons. He began focusing on authenticity and storytelling. The new format spotlighted stories behind the rare artifacts people brought in. Rick wasn't just the savvy businessman anymore. He became a storyteller, diving deep into the historical context of each item and engaging with experts who could offer even deeper insights. The show became more of an educational journey, where viewers could learn about the past through the lens of his pawn shop dealings. But this wasn't all about business. The true twist came when Rick began to use his platform for social causes. After years of being seen as a tough, no-nonsense businessman, Rick surprised many when he became increasingly vocal about issues such as mental health, addiction recovery, and community outreach. These new causes became intertwined with his personal story, as Rick now used his influence to raise awareness and support the causes closest to his heart. What had once been a flailing brand was now finding its feet again, gaining fresh traction with a younger generation and rekindling the interest of older fans who had long since moved on. People who had grown tired of the same old antics found themselves drawn in by the new format, while longtime fans were reassured by Rick's commitment to honoring the roots of Pawn Stars. He was able to adapt, show personal growth, and create something fresh without losing sight of what made the show special in the first place. In many ways, Rick Harrison's resurgence in the TV world mirrored his own personal transformation. After his legal troubles and public scandal, Rick had reinvented himself both on and off screen. The public redemption arc was almost as fascinating as the deals he made in his shop. The once divisive character was now seen in a new light, less as a controversial figure and more as someone who had earned a second chance. People began to root for him again, recognizing that his true strength wasn't just in making deals but in overcoming adversity and staying true to himself. As the revived Pawn Stars became a hit once again, Rick's legacy began to evolve. The story of the man who had faced so much public backlash was now being rewritten as one of resilience, growth, and self-awareness. What started as a business venture with his father in Las Vegas had grown into something much bigger, something that would live on in popular culture for years to come. In the end, it wasn't just the items in the pawn shop that had value. It was Rick himself.